this episode, we turn to a subject that helps organizations think clearly before a disruption happens instead of guessing under pressure after one has already begun. Business Impact Analysis, BIA, is one of the most practical ways to connect technology, operations, and risk to the real needs of the business. For a brand new learner, the phrase may sound formal or overly strategic, but the underlying idea is very human and very direct. If an important system stops working, how badly does that hurt the organization? How quickly does the harm grow? And which activities need to come back first? Those questions sit at the heart of the topic. A good BIA does not begin with hardware or software. It begins with understanding what the organization actually does, what it cannot afford to lose for long, and what kinds of disruption create the greatest damage to people, money, reputation, legal obligations, and normal daily work. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The simplest way to understand a BIA is to see it as a structured process for identifying and evaluating the effects of interruption on business activities. It is not just a technical exercise, and it is not only about disaster recovery sites or emergency communication plans. Instead, it focuses on the consequences of losing important services, processes, data, facilities, vendors, or supporting systems for some period of time. The analysis asks what would happen if a function became unavailable, how long the organization could tolerate that condition, and what resources would be needed to reduce harm. This makes the BIA valuable because it turns vague concern into usable information. Rather than saying a system seems important, management can connect that system to payroll, patient care, revenue collection, regulatory reporting, or customer support, and then judge its importance based on visible business effect instead of instinct alone. That business connection is what makes the topic so important in governance and audit. Many organizations have limited money, limited staff, and limited time, which means they cannot protect every process and every system at the highest possible level. Decisions have to be made about priority, and those decisions should be based on actual impact rather than politics or guesswork. ABIA helps leadership decide where stronger recovery capability is worth the investment and where slower restoration may be acceptable. It also helps technical teams understand why one system deserves faster attention than another during a disruption. Without this analysis, priorities often become distorted. The loudest manager, the most visible application, or the most recent complaint may drive decisions, even if the true business impact lies somewhere else entirely. A mature organization uses ABIA to bring order and evidence to those decisions before a crisis forces people to choose under stress. A helpful beginner insight is that the BIA does not start with technology alone because businesses do not exist merely to keep servers running. They exist to deliver products, services, care, decisions, support, teaching, payments, or other outcomes that matter to customers and stakeholders. Technology is often essential to those outcomes, but it is still a supporting layer beneath the actual business activity. That means a strong BIA begins by identifying critical functions such as order fulfillment, claims processing, emergency response, student registration, or financial closing. Once those activities are understood, the organization can ask which applications, databases, staff roles, facilities, data sources, third parties, and communication methods support them. This approach matters because it prevents a common mistake. If people begin with a list of systems and only later try to guess which ones matter, they may miss the real connection between technology failure and business harm. Starting with business functions keeps the analysis grounded in what the organization is truly trying to preserve. Once critical activities are identified, the next step is understanding the kinds of impact that would follow if those activities were interrupted. Financial loss is one obvious category, but it is far from the only one. A disruption can also create legal exposure, regulatory violations, reputational harm, customer dissatisfaction, safety concerns, operational backlog, missed deadlines, and loss of confidence among business partners or employees. Some of these effects appear immediately, while others build gradually as the outage continues. This is why the BIA is more than a spreadsheet of dollar amounts. It is an effort to understand how business harm unfolds over time and across different dimensions. A payroll interruption may create employee frustration quickly and regulatory consequences later. A customer-facing outage may create lost revenue in the first hour and long-term trust damage after repeated failures. The analysis becomes stronger when it captures those layered effects instead of treating impact as a single number that fully explains every consequence. Time is one of the most important ideas in ABIA because impact is rarely static. A disruption that feels manageable during the first 30 minutes may become serious after 4 hours and unacceptable after one full day. This is why the analysis asks not just whether a process is important, but how long the organization can tolerate its loss before harm becomes severe. Some activities can pause briefly with little trouble, especially if staff can use temporary workarounds or delay the work without major consequence. Other activities become dangerous or deeply disruptive almost immediately. Understanding that time dimension helps management separate inconvenience from intolerable loss. It also helps recovery planning make sense. If all critical activities are treated as equally urgent regardless of how quickly damage grows, resources will be spread too broadly and recovery efforts will become confused. Time-based thinking brings discipline by showing when a disruption crosses from annoying to damaging to unacceptable for each major activity. This leads naturally to two terms that often appear in continuity discussions and are worth understanding clearly. Recovery time objective, RTO, refers to the target amount of time within which a process or system should be restored after a disruption. Recovery point objective, RPO, refers to the amount of data loss the organization is willing to tolerate, measured backward from the point of disruption. These ideas matter because availability and data are not the same issue. A service might come back online quickly but still lose too much recent information, or the data might be preserved well while the service remains unavailable too long for the business. The BIA helps determine what acceptable recovery looks like for each critical activity by linking those targets to real business consequences. This prevents teams from choosing recovery goals based only on technical preference. Instead, the targets reflect what the business can actually tolerate and what it cannot. Another important part of the BIA is dependency mapping, even if that phrase sounds more technical than it needs to be. Every important business activity depends on something else, and sometimes on many things at once. A payment process may depend on network connectivity, a database, user authentication, a vendor platform, trained staff, office access, and correct data feeds from another system. A student registration service may rely on identity management, course databases, billing systems, and support staff who handle exceptions. If the organization studies only the main application and ignores these dependencies, the recovery picture will be incomplete. The BIA helps reveal that critical functions are often supported by long chains of people, processes, technology, facilities, and outside services. This is one of the biggest reasons the analysis is so valuable. It shows that recovery is not simply about turning one system back on. It is about restoring the set of conditions the business activity actually needs in order to function. A strong BIA also benefits from speaking with the right people rather than being completed only by one technical team working in isolation. Process owners, department leaders, operations staff, support teams, compliance personnel, and sometimes vendors all have pieces of the real picture. The finance group may understand month-end deadlines in a way infrastructure staff do not. Clinical leaders may understand safety impacts that application teams would underestimate. Customer service managers may know exactly how long a call center can function with manual workarounds before backlogs become unmanageable. Bringing these perspectives together helps the analysis reflect reality rather than assumptions. It also improves buy-in later because people are more likely to trust recovery priorities they help define. A BIA that lives only inside the technology department may overlook business nuance, while one built with cross-functional input is more likely to capture the actual consequences of disruption as experienced across the organization. There is also an important balance between qualitative and quantitative thinking in this work. Some impacts can be estimated in measurable terms such as lost revenue, penalties, overtime costs, or missed transactions. Other impacts are harder to express exactly but still matter greatly, such as reputational damage, public trust, employee confidence, or harm to strategic relationships. A mature BIA does not ignore those less precise effects just because they are difficult to count neatly. It recognizes that decision-making often requires both numbers and judgment. An organization may not be able to calculate the exact cost of damaging its reputation during a major outage, but leadership still understands that repeated public failure can affect future business and credibility. The goal of the analysis is not to pretend every effect fits perfectly into one formula. The goal is to create a reliable picture of significance that is clear enough to support planning, prioritization, and investment decisions in a grounded way. Beginners often misunderstand the BIA as a one-time document created for compliance and then stored away until the next audit cycle. That is one of the most common and most damaging misconceptions. A BIA should be reviewed and updated when the business changes, because priorities, dependencies, technologies, vendor arrangements, and operating models do not stand still. A process that was low priority 3 years ago may now support a major revenue stream. A manual workaround that once seemed reasonable may no longer be practical after staffing changes or growth in transaction volume. A third-party platform may now sit at the center of several services that used to be separate. If the BIA is outdated, recovery plans built on it may also be outdated, which means the organization can appear prepared on paper while actually being poorly aligned with current business reality. Keeping the analysis current is therefore part of operational maturity, not just administrative maintenance. The BIA also plays a major role in broader continuity and resilience planning because it informs what kind of recovery capabilities the organization truly needs. If the analysis shows that a process cannot be down for long, then the organization may need stronger redundancy, faster restoration procedures, better vendor commitments, or more frequent backups. If the analysis shows that data loss must be kept to a minimum, then backup and replication strategies may need to be more robust. If certain work can continue manually for a short period, recovery planning can account for that and focus scarce technical resources elsewhere first. In other words, the BIA does not solve recovery on its own, but it tells the organization what its recovery arrangements must be able to support. That connection is why the topic matters so much. Continuity planning without a meaningful BIA can become generic and unfocused, while planning informed by real impact analysis is much more likely to protect the business where it truly matters. From an audit perspective, the BIA reveals whether management is making continuity and recovery decisions with evidence or simply with broad claims about what seems critical. An auditor is not expected to determine the recovery priority of every business function personally, but should be able to evaluate whether the organization has a reasonable method for identifying critical activities, assessing impacts, setting time and data recovery expectations, considering dependencies, and reviewing the results periodically. Weak environments often show familiar warning signs. Priorities are unclear, recovery targets have no visible business basis, different departments disagree about what is most important, and plans are rarely updated to reflect new systems or operating conditions. Stronger environments can explain how the analysis was performed, who contributed, what assumptions were used, and how the results influenced recovery planning and resource decisions. This makes the BIA a valuable window into whether the organization's resilience planning is thoughtful and business-driven or merely formal and superficial. There is also a deeper lesson here about how organizations understand themselves. A BIA forces people to ask what work is truly essential, what disruption really costs, and which supporting elements are so critical that their absence quickly threatens the whole operation. Those are not only recovery questions. They are also governance questions because they reveal where the organization is most vulnerable and what it values most in practice. Sometimes the process exposes uncomfortable truths, such as overdependence on one vendor, outdated workarounds, unclear ownership, or a mismatch between claimed priorities and actual business behavior. That is not a weakness of the analysis. That is part of its value. When done honestly, ABIA makes hidden assumptions visible and gives leadership a clearer picture of where resilience is strong, where it is fragile, and where future investment or process improvement may be necessary to reduce unacceptable exposure. Business impact analysis should feel less like a formal planning requirement and more like a disciplined way of understanding what the organization cannot afford to lose for long. It helps identify critical business activities, understand the different forms of harm that follow disruption, measure how impact grows over time, define appropriate recovery expectations such as RTO and RPO, and uncover the dependencies that make recovery more complex than it first appears. It also strengthens continuity planning by making priorities visible and defensible rather than vague or political. For a new learner, the most important takeaway is simple. The value of ABIA is not in producing a document. Its value is in helping the organization think clearly about what matters most before a disruption happens, so that when trouble arrives, recovery decisions are guided by real business need instead of panic, guesswork, or the loudest voice in the room.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.